The massive space battle was going terribly wrong for the Galactic Council. Admiral Vexthera stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching in horror as another one of their ships exploded into a ball of fire. The enemy was unlike anything they had ever faced before. The Vorthok swarm was not just another alien race. These creatures were like space locusts, devouring everything in their path. Their ships were not built like normal spacecraft. Instead, they were living creatures that could heal themselves and adapt to any weapon fired at them. Every time the Council forces tried a new attack, the Vorthok would learn and become immune to it within minutes. "Admiral, we just lost the Harmony's light," called out Communications Officer Kelter, his voice shaking with fear. "That makes 7 ships destroyed in just 2 hours. Vexeris' alien tentacles twitched nervously. He had been fighting wars for over 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Vorthok moved through space like a deadly plague, their bioships eating through metal holes and draining energy from power cores. They left nothing but empty space behind them. The Council's military doctrine was based on honor and civilized warfare. They used precise tactics, followed rules of engagement, and always gave enemies a chance to surrender. But the Vorthok showed no mercy. They attacked without warning, fought without rules, and never retreated. They were like a force of nature that could not be reasoned with or stopped. "Sir, our weapons are having no effect," reported the tactical officer. "Every time we damage one of their ships, it just grows back stronger. They're learning from each attack." Vexthera looked at the tactical display. Red dots representing Vorthok ships outnumbered the blue dots of Council forces by 3, 2, 1. And the gap was growing larger every minute as more Council ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. "We need help," he said quietly. "Send out a distress signal on all emergency frequencies. Tell any ship, any species, any military force that can hear us that we need immediate assistance." Kelter hesitated for a moment. "Sir, should I include the restricted frequencies? The ones that reach the quarantine zone?" The quarantine zone was a part of the galaxy that the Council had sealed off decades ago. It contained worlds that were considered too dangerous for normal contact. These were called Deathworlds, planets where everything was trying to kill everything else. The species that lived on these worlds were violent, unpredictable, and primitive. The Council had decided long ago that it was better to keep them isolated for everyone's safety. "Admiral, those worlds contain species that have been classified as too dangerous for civilized contact," Kelter continued. "The reports say they solve problems with violence and have no concept of proper warfare." Vexthera watched another Council ship get torn apart by Vorthok bioweapons. The screams of the dying crew echoed through the communication channels. Standard galactic civilization was about to be destroyed by creatures that cared nothing for rules or honor. "Do it," he ordered grimly. "Send the signal to every frequency we have, including the quarantine zone. We're desperate enough to try anything at this point." As the distress signal went out across the galaxy, Vexthera wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. But with his fleet dying around him and the Vorthok advancing toward populated worlds, he was willing to risk contact with the dangerous species from the Deathworlds. Little did he know that his desperate call for help was about to change everything, Captain. Li Jun was sitting in his command chair aboard the UES Defiance, going through boring paperwork about food supplies and ammunition counts. It was just another quiet day patrolling the outer edges of the solar system. Earth's fleet had been doing the same routine for decades now. Ever since the aliens had cut them off from the rest of the galaxy, suddenly, the bridge speakers crackled to life with a strange transmission. The voice was speaking in broken Standard Galactic, a language that most humans had forgotten how to speak properly. The message was filled with panic and desperation. "This is Admiral Vexthera of the Galactic Council," the alien voice said, cutting in and out through static. "We are under attack by hostile forces. Massive casualties. Request immediate assistance from any available military units." Navigator Park Min-ho looked up from his console with surprise. "Captain, I'm tracking the source of that signal. It's coming from way outside our solar system. It's like really far outside. We're talking about the other side of the galaxy." Li Jun stood up and walked over to the star charts displayed on the main screen. The signal was indeed coming from incredibly far away, from a part of space that humans had never been allowed to visit. Earth had been isolated from galactic civilization for over 40 years now. Ever since first contact had gone terribly wrong, the aliens had visited Earth back in the 2080s, expecting to find a peaceful, civilized species ready to join their galactic community. Instead, they found humans in the middle of several wars, with weapons that scared them, and a history of violence that made them uncomfortable. After studying Earth's environment and culture, they had classified the planet as a Class 12 death world and established a strict quarantine around the entire solar system. "Sir, I'm getting a message from Terran Defense Force Command," reported Communications Officer Kim Sora. "They're saying we should ignore the alien distress signal. They say it's not our problem and that we should stick to our patrol duties." Li Jun listened to the alien voices continuing to plead for help over the radio. Could hear the fear in their voices, the same kind of fear he had heard from human civilians when enemy forces were approaching their cities. These aliens were facing something that terrified them, something that was destroying their ships and killing their people. He thought about his 8-year-old daughter back on Earth, safe in her school because generations of human soldiers had chosen to fight when it mattered. He thought about all the times throughout history when humans had risked everything to help strangers in need, even when it wasn't their fight. "Kim, get me a direct line to the other ships in our patrol group," he ordered. "Tell them to prepare for immediate departure." "Sir, are you sure about this?" Kim asked nervously. "The quarantine protocols specifically forbid any contact with alien forces. This would be a direct violation of agreements that have been in place for decades." Li Jun walked back to his captain's chair and sat down, his mind made up. "Those same protocols didn't stop us from becoming the best fighters in the galaxy," he said with a grim smile. "While the aliens have been playing politics, we've been preparing for war." He pressed the ship-wide communication button. "It's all hands. This is the captain. Load every weapon we have. Prep the Marines for combat deployment. We're going to help these aliens, whether the bureaucrats like it or not." The crew responded immediately, their training taking over. They were finally going to war. The space around the battle zone suddenly lit up with bright flashes as 3 unknown ships materialized out of hyperspace. Admiral Vexthera had been expecting reinforcements from other Council worlds, but these ships looked different. They were smaller, more angular, and covered in what looked like weapon systems that no civilized species would ever mount on their vessels, before Vexthera could even process what was happening. Immediately opened fire on the Vorthok swarm. No communication, no identification, no request for battle plans or coordination. They just started shooting with an intensity that made the alien admiral's blood run cold. "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Vexthera of the Galactic Council," he broadcast urgently. "Please identify yourselves and follow standard engagement protocols. We need to coordinate our attack patterns to avoid friendly fire incidents." A rough, gravelly voice came back over the communication channel, speaking in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Protocols later, Admiral. We're here to kill bugs. Just point us at the biggest ones and get out of our way." Vexthera watched in complete amazement as the lead ship dove straight toward a massive Vorthok biocruiser that had been terrorizing his fleet for hours. The unknown vessel fired every weapon it had while charging directly at the enemy. Was not how civilized warfare was supposed to work. Galactic Council military doctrine emphasized careful planning, precise strikes, and minimal casualties. Ships were supposed to maintain safe distances, use long-range weapons, and retreat when damaged. But these newcomers were doing the exact opposite of everything he had been taught. "Sir, they're ramming the enemy ships," gasped Tactical Officer Morden, his voice filled with shock and horror. "That's completely barbaric. No civilized species would sacrifice their own vessels like that." The human ship slammed into the Vorthok biocruiser at full speed, both vessels exploding in a brilliant fireball. But somehow, escape pods were ejecting from the human ship just before impact, meaning the crew had planned this suicidal attack from the beginning. "It's working though," Vexthera replied, watching the Vorthok formation break apart in confusion. The alien insects had never faced an enemy that was willing to trade ship for ship in direct combat. They were used to fighting civilized species that valued their own lives and equipment. The second human ship was now engaging 3 Vorthok fighters at once, spinning and weaving through their attacks like it was performing some kind of deadly dance. The pilot was taking risks that would have gotten him court-martialed in any council military. But somehow he was winning. The third human vessel was doing something even more shocking. It was firing on damaged Vorthok ships that were trying to retreat, completely ignoring the galactic rules of war that required allowing enemy forces to surrender or withdraw. These humans fight like the Vorthok themselves, Vexera muttered. Watching the brutal efficiency of the newcomers, they're not following any rules of civilized warfare. The gruff voice came over the communication channel again. Captain Lee Jun, Terran Defense Force. We got your SOS signal about an hour ago. Sorry we're late to the party, but we had to travel halfway across the galaxy to get here. Vexthera felt something he hadn't experienced in hours. Hope.
Oh.
These were the beings from the quarantine zone, the Deathworlders that the Council had. Isolated because they were too dangerous for normal contact right now. Their violence and aggression were exactly what his fleet needed to survive. The Deathworlders had arrived. They were ready to fight. The explosion that ripped through the Vorthok bioship's hull was unlike anything the Galactic Council forces had ever seen. Instead of the precise surgical strikes they were used to, the humans had simply blown a massive hole in the enemy vessel and were now pouring through it like water through a broken dam. Sergeant Odesu was the first through the breach. His heavy assault rifle already firing before his boots hit the organic floor of the alien ship. The interior of the Vorthok vessel was like something out of a nightmare. The walls pulsed with a sickly green light, and the corridors were made of what looked like living tissue that oozed strange fluids. "Contact front!" shouted Private Choi Yuna, her pulse rifle spitting energy bolts at a massive Vorthok warrior that had just rounded the corner. The insectoid creature was easily twice her size, with razor-sharp claws and armor that looked like it could stop a tank round. But Yuna didn't even hesitate. She kept firing and moving, using the narrow corridor to her advantage. "Remember, these things learn fast," Odesu called out to his squad as they advanced deeper into the ship. "Don't use the same tactic twice. Keep them guessing. The moment they figure out your pattern, you're dead." This was something the humans had learned the hard way during their first encounters with the Vorthok. The alien creatures could adapt to almost any strategy within minutes, which made traditional military tactics useless. But humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other, and they knew how to be unpredictable. The Marines were carrying equipment that would have horrified any civilized military force. Instead of standard-issue weapons, they had improvised explosives made from mining charges, jury-rigged energy weapons that had been modified far beyond their original specifications, and chemical compounds that were technically considered war crimes by galactic standards. "This is completely insane," Admiral Vexera muttered, watching the human assault through his ship's sensors. "They're turning their own damaged equipment into weapons." Engineer Kongboram was indeed doing exactly that. She was working on a broken reactor core that had been damaged in the initial attack, but instead of trying to repair it, she was deliberately making it more unstable. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she rewired the safety systems to fail catastrophically. "Waste not, want not," she replied cheerfully when another human soldier asked what she was doing. "On Earth, we learned to make everything count. This reactor might be broken, but it still has enough power to take out half this ship." The Vorthok had spent centuries overwhelming civilized species with superior numbers and adaptive tactics. They were used to fighting enemies who followed rules, who tried to minimize casualties, and who valued their own equipment too much to sacrifice it. But humans were different. The human Marines were using broken furniture as shields, turning medical supplies into makeshift weapons, and using the ship's own ventilation system to spread smoke and confusion. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. One Marine was using a damaged communication device to jam the Vorthok's internal communications, while another had figured out how to turn the ship's artificial gravity against the defenders. The aliens found themselves fighting in an environment that was becoming more chaotic and unpredictable by the minute. The Vorthok warriors were discovering that they had finally met an enemy that fought even dirtier than they did. The battle had been raging for hours, but something was starting to change. The Galactic Council forces, who had been retreating in panic just a few hours earlier, were now fighting alongside the humans with a determination that surprised everyone. Marine Sergeant Yujin Ho was floating in the zero gravity of a damaged space station, showing a group of Centauri soldiers how to use ordinary maintenance tools as deadly weapons. The aliens watched in amazement as he demonstrated how a simple wrench could be turned into a devastating close-combat weapon in weightless conditions. "The key is to use the zero gravity to your advantage," Ginho explained, spinning the wrench. "In a complex pattern that would have been impossible on a planet, in space, momentum is everything. You don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be smarter." Lieutenant Zarthok, a veteran Centauri officer, watched the demonstration with fascination. "Your people fight with honor," he noted, observing how Ginho helped a wounded alien soldier move to safety even while teaching combat techniques. "But humans fight to win." "Same thing, different perspective," Ginho replied, using his own body to shield the injured alien from flying debris. "We protect what matters to us. Honor comes from that protection, not from following rules that get people killed." Meanwhile, engineer Nam So-young was working with alien tech crews to turn their own damaged ships into weapons. The Galactic Council had always viewed damaged vessels as liabilities to be evacuated and abandoned, but humans saw them as opportunities. The Vorthok, "Expect you to retreat when your ship is disabled," she explained to a group of alien engineers, who were staring at her like she was insane. "It's what civilized species do. But we're not going to be civilized today. When your ship is too damaged to fight normally, don't retreat. Accelerate." She was showing them how to override the safety systems on a crippled cruiser, turning it into a guided missile that could be aimed at enemy formations. The aliens were horrified by the concept of deliberately destroying their own equipment, but they were starting to understand the brutal logic behind it. The combined fleet was beginning to push back the Vorthok swarm for the first time since the battle began. The alien forces were learning human tactics with surprising speed. They were using floating debris as improvised weapons, continuing to fight even when their ships were heavily damaged, and turning every piece of equipment into a potential explosive device. "This is incredible," Admiral Vexera said, watching his crew work with a determination he had never seen before. "They're teaching us to fight like Deathworlders." Captain Lee Jun, who was coordinating the combined fleet from his command ship, heard the comment over the communication channel. "No," he corrected the alien admiral. "We're teaching you to fight like you've got something worth dying for." The difference was subtle, but important. Humans weren't just showing the aliens how to be violent or brutal. They were teaching them how to fight with purpose, how to make every sacrifice count, and how to never give up when the people they cared about were in danger. The Vorthok, who had dominated the galaxy through fear and superior numbers, were discovering that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They were facing an enemy that refused to surrender. The fighting had stopped for a few hours, while both sides regrouped and tended to their wounded. In the medical bay of Admiral Vexthera's flagship, an unusual scene was taking place. Human and alien officers were sharing a meal together, something that hadn't happened in decades due to the quarantine. The alien officers were fascinated by their human allies, but also deeply disturbed by what they were learning about Earth. Science Officer Peltera was asking questions that she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. "So your planet has weather that can actually kill you?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Most civilized worlds had weather control systems that prevented dangerous storms. Medic on Hyjin looked up from where she was treating a wounded Vorthok prisoner. She was giving the enemy soldier the same careful medical attention she had given to human and alien allies, checking his injuries with gentle hands despite the fact that he had been trying to kill them hours earlier. "Oh yeah, all the time," she said casually. "Tornadoes that can level entire cities, hurricanes with winds that can throw cars around like toys, earthquakes that split the ground open, volcanoes that bury whole regions in ash and lava, lightning storms that can kill you instantly, flash, floods that can sweep away buildings, avalanches that can bury towns under tons of snow. She continued working on the Vorthok's wounds as she talked, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. Pretty much everything on Earth wants to kill you, and most of it succeeds on a regular basis. What about the animals on your world? Asked another alien officer, his curiosity overcoming his horror. Pilot SEO Minjun actually laughed at the question. Oh, don't get me started on the animals, he said, taking a bite of his field rations. We've got big cats that can break your neck with one swipe of their paw. Fish in the ocean that can strip you down to bone in minutes if you're unlucky enough to fall in the wrong water. Insects that can kill you with a single bite, injecting poison that stops your heart in seconds. There are spiders the size of dinner plates, snakes that can swallow a full-grown human whole, and sharks that are basically swimming killing machines with teeth, added another human soldier. And those are just the things we know about. The deep ocean is full of creatures that would give you nightmares. Communications Officer Kelter was staring at the humans with a mixture of amazement and terror. Your world sounds like a complete nightmare, he whispered. Yeah. How do you even survive childhood? Minjan just shrugged, as if living on a planet that was constantly trying to kill him was the most natural thing in the world. It's home, he said simply. Makes you tough, makes you appreciate what you've got. When you grow up knowing that a storm can destroy your house, or a wild animal can kill you just for being in the wrong place, you learn to be ready for anything. Admiral Vexthera had been listening to the conversation with growing understanding. Finally, he realized why the Galactic Council had quarantined Earth all those years ago. It wasn't because humans were too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology, or because they were too primitive to join civilized society. It was because they were too dangerous to be unleashed without a very good reason. This battle against the Vorthok, which had been the most terrifying experience of his long military career, wasn't even a real challenge for the humans. For them, it was just another Tuesday. The space around the battlefield suddenly went dark as something massive blocked out the light from the nearest star. Every sensor on every ship started screaming warnings as the largest bioship anyone had ever seen emerged from hyperspace. The Vorthok Queen had arrived, and she was beyond anything the combined fleet had prepared for. The Queen was not just a ship. She was a living creature the size of a small moon, her hull rippling and shifting like the skin of some ancient sea monster. Her surface was covered in what looked like organic armor that seemed to move and change color as the Allied forces fired their weapons at her. Standard galactic weapons are completely useless, reported Weapons Officer Torvis, his voice filled with despair. Every time we hit her with something, her armor adapts and becomes immune to that type of attack. She's learning and changing faster than we can adjust our weapons. The Queen's arrival had an immediate effect on the smaller Vorthok forces. Where before they had been fierce but somewhat coordinated, now they became absolutely frenzied. They threw themselves at the Allied ships with suicidal determination, no longer caring about their own survival as long as they could protect their queen. Sir, the smaller Vorthok ships are changing their attack patterns, reported the tactical officer. They're ignoring their own safety completely. It's like they're being controlled directly by that thing. Captain Li Jun watched the massive creature through the main view screen of his ship. The Queen was slowly moving toward the center of the Allied fleet, her countless weapons charging with energy that made the space around her glow with deadly light. We need to take her out, he said grimly, his mind already working through the tactical problems. She's the nerve center of the entire swarm. Kill her, and the rest of the Vorthok will lose their coordination. They'll probably turn on each other. Admiral Vexthera looked at the tactical display showing the Queen's massive form. How do we even attack something like that? Our most powerful weapons barely scratched her armor, and she's already adapting to everything we throw at her. Li Jun studied the readings from his ship's sensors. The Queen's adaptive armor was incredible, unlike anything in the known galaxy. But it was still biological tissue, and humans had spent thousands of years learning how to kill biological things. We ram her, he said simply, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what he was suggesting. Full reactor overload, maximum acceleration, right into her core. The explosion should be big enough to destroy her from the inside. That's suicide, protested Vexthera, his alien features showing shock and horror. No civilized species would ever consider sacrificing an entire ship and crew for a single attack. Yeah, Li Jun smiled sadly, thinking about his 8-year-old daughter back on Earth, who would never see her father again. But it'll work. And sometimes that's all that matters. He began making preparations for a one-way trip, knowing that his sacrifice might be the only thing that could save not just the Allied fleet, but possibly the entire galaxy from the Vorthok swarm. The other human ships were already volunteering to join him, but Li Jun knew that one ship would be enough. It just had to be the right ship with the right captain, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. The EU's Defiance began its final acceleration toward the massive Vorthok Queen. Its nuclear reactor pushed far beyond any safe operating limits. The ship's hull was already glowing red-hot from the incredible energy being channeled through systems that were never designed to handle such power. Captain Li Jun sat alone on the bridge, his hands steady on the controls despite knowing he was flying towards certain death. Just minutes earlier, he had ordered his entire crew to evacuate to the other ships in the fleet. They had protested, wanting to stay and die with their captain, but he had made it a direct order. All ships, this is Li Jun, he broadcast on the open channel, his voice calm and clear despite the chaos around him. Tell Earth when you get home. Tell them we did good out here. Tell them we saved some friends. The Vorthok Queen had noticed the approaching ship and was turning her massive biocannons toward the Defiance. Streams of organic acid and energy beams tore into the hull, ripping through armor plating and melting entire sections of the ship. But Li Jun had planned for this. He had reinforced the ship's forward sections with every spare piece of metal they could find, creating a makeshift battering ram that could survive just long enough to reach the target. The Defiance shuddered and groaned as the Queen's weapons tore it apart. But it held together through sheer determination and human engineering. When the ship finally struck the Queen's core, the explosion was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The nuclear reactor pushed beyond its limits and then detonated at the exact moment of impact, released energy equivalent to a small star-going supernova. The explosion was so bright that it was visible from 3 star systems away. The Queen's death scream echoed across space, a sound that seemed to come from the very fabric of reality itself. Her massive form, which had seemed invincible just moments before, began to break apart in massive chunks. Ow! The organic armor that had adapted to every weapon fired at it was powerless against the raw nuclear fire that was consuming her from within. The smaller Vorthok ships, which had been fighting with such coordination and ferocity, suddenly stopped their attacks. Cut off from their hive mind, they began attacking each other in confusion. Without the Queen's controlling influence, they reverted to their basic instincts and saw every other creature as a threat. "Clean up the stragglers," ordered Admiral Vexthera quietly, his voice heavy with grief for the human captain who had just saved them all, "and treat the wounded ones with the respect that Captain Li Jun would have wanted." The remaining human forces worked alongside their alien allies to secure the battlefield and tend to the wounded. Medicon Hyjin was treating injured Vorthok soldiers with the same gentle care she had shown to human and alien allies throughout the battle. "Ah!" Young Centauri officer watched her work with confusion. "Why do you help them?" he asked. "They tried to kill us just hours ago." "No." Hyjin looked up from the wounded Vorthok she was treating, her hands never stopping their work. "Because Captain Li Jun taught us that how you treat your enemies defines who you are," she replied. "We're not monsters. We're just very good at killing them when we have to." The battle was over. But the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the battle against the Vorthok Queen, Admiral Vexthera stood in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council on the capital world of Centauri Prime. The massive room was filled with representatives from hundreds of different species, all waiting to hear his final report about the events that had changed everything. The chamber fell completely silent as Vexthera finished describing Captain Li Jun's sacrifice and the humans' role in saving the galaxy from total destruction. The implications of what he was suggesting were staggering, and every counselor in the room understood the magnitude of the decision they were about to make. "Let me understand this correctly, Admiral," said Counselor Murthok, his blue skin darkening with concern. "You're recommending that we lift the quarantine on Earth, the same planet we classified as too dangerous for civilized contact?" Vexthera nodded firmly. "I'm recommending we invite them to join the Galactic Council as a protectorate military species," he replied. "They saved us when our own forces failed completely. Without their intervention, the Vorthok would have destroyed every civilized world in this sector." "But they're Deathworlders," protested another counselor. "Violent, primitive beings who solve problems with aggression and destruction. How can we trust them with advanced technology and access to peaceful worlds?" "They're survivors," Vexthera interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen humans in action. "And they're exactly what we need to protect civilized space from threats like the Vorthok. We've been living in a peaceful bubble for too long, and when real danger appeared, we were helpless." He activated a holographic display showing the battle footage. "Look at how they fought, not with mindless violence, but with purpose. They protected wounded enemies, they shared their knowledge freely, and they sacrificed themselves to save people they had never met before." The council chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the proposal. Some argued that humans were too dangerous to be trusted. Others pointed out that they had already proven themselves to be reliable allies when it mattered most. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. The quarantine on Earth would be lifted, and humanity would be invited to join galactic civilization as equals. Back on Earth, Ambassador Park Yunho was preparing for the most important journey in human history. She would be the first official human representative to the Galactic Council, tasked with negotiating humanity's place in a galaxy full of alien species. She was nervous about representing her entire species to an audience of beings she had never met. But she had learned something important from reading the battle reports that Captain Lee Jun had transmitted before his final sacrifice. Humans weren't joining galactic civilization as junior partners begging for acceptance. They were joining as equals, with something valuable to offer that no other species possessed. The knowledge of how to survive and thrive in a hostile universe. The recruitment offices in major cities around Earth were flooded with volunteers. Young men and women were lining up to join the newly formed Galactic Defense Force, eager to defend their new alien friends across the galaxy. They had been inspired by Captain Lee Jun's example and wanted to carry on his legacy of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The Deathworlders had finally found their place among the stars, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as protectors and guardians of galactic peace.